Hi, welcome to the Ritter Dressage Q&A. Today we have a question from Tiana Famos, who is in one of our courses, and she had a question about the canter.
Yeah, so she posted a couple of photos and a video, and she said that she's been thinking a lot about the canter footfall sequence, and she noticed that sometimes the outside front leg touches down just a split second before the inside hind. And she says, basically my horse has a very good canter, I think. Usually he jumps uphill, canters uphill, and supports the weight well with the hind legs, and the inside hind leg engages well. And they're able to keep the back up most of the time. But in still photos, she often sees that the inside hind touches down just a tad after the outside front, and that according to conventional wisdom, that means that the horse is on the forehand, but it doesn't feel like it, basically. Or if you just look at a normal video, the horse looks balanced and looks good, and it feels like he's uphill, but just these little still photos, they don't match the feeling, so to speak, that she's getting. And so now she is wondering, what could cause that, and if maybe the inside hind leg engages too much, or if she needs to speed up the inside hind, or she's making a mistake, and so on. So that the typical questions that go through people's
where this
minds.
comes from, and what it means, and what she can do about it.
Exactly. And then she posted that in the course group, and a couple of people had some very good points. That I guess somebody recently published an article where they looked at tons of still photos of horses at liberty, and good horses, bad horses, horses with good canters, bad canters, under saddle, and so on. And a lot of these photos showed unconventional footfall sequences, so to speak. So what we would always consider as incorrect because of the way we were taught. But that brought up basically two interesting thoughts. One is that due to the equipment and the technical improvements, we can now detect or freeze frame hundredths of a second or a thousandth of a second. That was not possible in the past. So that brings up...
Our video these days has many more frames per second than it used to have. So we can see things that we couldn't see before.
Yeah, so it brings out things that have probably always been there, but that were not detectable. It's like, looking at something with a better microscope, suddenly you see a lot of stuff that is new, and you discover lots of new things, and you think that they're just surfacing now, but they've in reality always been there. That we just couldn't see them, right? And I think that plays a role. And I think the other thing is that the natural gaits have a larger spectrum of footfalls than the books teach us, or than we thought. We learn these very neat patterns, but I think in real life, with shifting balances and different footing, maybe different turns, movements, transitions, etc., you see that horses sometimes soften the regular footfall, the strict footfall. They handle it in a flexible way to stay balanced so they don't fall down.
Or there's a range within that is considered part of that footfall.
Exactly.
Like that moment when, in her case, it's when the diagonal touches down in the canter. That's the second beat of the canter, right? That's when the outside shoulder and the inside hind touch down together. I have to think for a second there. And so, but these touch down, but there might be a range of what is actually really normal within that it can be normal for it to be a fraction of a second different for each leg when it actually touches down. Possible.
And in our feeling, in our body, our awareness, we can't distinguish the separations of the diagonals that are smaller than a certain time unit, whatever. I don't know. It would be interesting to measure from what a separation of inside hind and outside front. What is it a tenth of a second? Is it a fifth of a second, or half a second? At what point can you actually feel thump thump?
that it's become a 4-beat canter instead of a 3-beat canter. So there's probably a certain point at which you start to be able to feel that.
At which you feel it, and
that's probably the point at which it's also detrimental.
Exactly. When you can feel it, then it certainly has a negative effect. If you can't feel it, it's probably not that dramatic. It's strictly speaking not correct, not what we want to see. But if in real life action, it looks uphill, it looks round, it looks balanced, and you can feel that there is a slight delay basically between outside front and inside hind, and it's probably in practical terms not that dramatic. Right. So that's things to keep in mind, and it's interesting to kind of watch out for that. If you see other examples, if you look at stills, if you look at a video in freeze frame and see if you can detect these little odd footfalls, so to speak, or deviations from the idiosyncrasies that deviate a little from the book wisdom. So it's interesting. Of course, if you see that in enough horses, then we may have to rethink a concept of the footfalls in the gaits, instead of thinking everybody rides badly or every horse moves badly, So especially if horses show this at liberty as well, when no rider interferes with a natural footfall sequence, then maybe the natural footfall sequence has a wider spectrum than what we thought so far.
But we have her photos and some video footage that we wanted to share with you and look at and talk about with you, because it's interesting, and I think it's a launching point for some further discovery and discussion. Here we are with the first photo that she had sent to us. And so...
Yeah, I mean, see, it's a nice horse, and it looks like it's a
very attractive horse.
Good natural canter. And yes, the outside front touches down a little bit before the inside hind, and it would be interesting then to ask her if she can actually feel the difference. But from her question that she wrote, it doesn't sound like she can feel this different, because it's really a tiny split second.
So you can see that this is should be the second beat of the canter, right? The first beat of the canter is the outside hind touching down. The second beat is the main diagonal of the inside hind and the outside shoulder touching down. Except if you look here, they're not touching down together at the same time. The outside front is already touching down, and if or just beginning to touch down, and the inside hind is still in the air. A couple inches in the air still.
And so but when I look at the overall picture, the hind end action actually looks pretty good. The outside shoulder looks like it's a little bit lower than it should be. There's maybe a little feeling of the outside front coming back as it's going down, as opposed to following through in a sort of a ballistic arch. The neck appears a little short. For me, it looks like the horse might be a tiny bit behind the vertical, and that can happen, for example, if the rein contact is a little too firm, or if the rein contact is not covered or supported enough by the seat and the leg. And now I don't know if the picture was taken in a jumping lesson, because the stirrups are really short, like jumping stirrups, and the foot is all the way in, which then limits the flexibility of the ankles. And the saddle looks actually like it's a dressage saddle.
Yeah, in fact, we have another photo here, and you can see that it is a dressage saddle. Different day, different time, but same issue happening.
And this knee roll is in the wrong place for that stirrup length, so it interferes with the leg position, and I think it limits the flexibility of the rider's hips and knees, and that doesn't allow the rider's pelvis to sink forward and down deep enough, and that can create an interference. That can create this backward traction on the reins.
Yeah, here, the horse doesn't give the impression of being so short in the neck.
Right, here the neck is longer.
She's she has rein contact, and it looks like she is using the rein at that moment, but it doesn't look like she's pulling the neck necessarily short.
And the outside front doesn't look quite as retracted here, but it's the right lead too. I mean, horses do have little differences between left leads and right lead canters, you know. And again, the hind end, the pelvis, hind legs look pretty good actually.
Yeah.
And also, it seems like the inside hind is already closer to the ground, so the separation is smaller in this diagonal, right hind, left front, than it was in the other,
which is
diagonal.
perhaps significant.
Yeah,
perhaps significant. So notice he's not so short in the neck.
Right.
He's a little bit more up and out, a little more open in the pole, which is a good thing.
Right.
And the canter is, you know, that diagonal is slightly more synchronized.
Exactly,
so that may be significant.
Yeah, exactly. I suspect it is. And there, it's common that horses diagonalize or synchronize one diagonal pair of legs more easily than the other.
Yes.
You see that when you train Piaffe, for example, that one diagonal pair synchronizes quickly and the other one is often a little, you know, separate. So it's like a sort of a 4-beat Piaffe, you know, which sometimes is so small, you know, that it's not that easy to detect. You know, sometimes it's more. So, you know, and that's not uncommon, and that probably has to do with the horse. It's not necessarily caused by the rider at that moment. But I do think that this saddle and stirrup length have something to do with it, and the mobility of the hip, and the pelvis is a little, you know, behind the deepest point of the saddle, right? It's pelvis is pushed back onto the cantle.
Right. Which, if you were about to go over a jump, this would be an okay balance to be in, because you have a different balance for jumping than you do for dressage. But for doing the standard dressage work that we do,
it's a little too far back.
Yeah.
And but she also sent in a video where she rides with a longer stirrup.
Do you want to look at that now?
Yeah, let's look at that.
Okay, here we are with video footage, and let's start at the beginning. It's a little hard to see because the
horse is a little far away from the camera, and the resolution is not that great. But you see that in motion it looks pretty good. This, you know, you would never think that.
Yeah, you wouldn't look at this necessarily. It's a short video, so we can watch it again.
Yeah, I have to watch it again, and maybe we can freeze frame there as the horse comes closer to the camera.
Okay. Maybe you want to do this.
It's always tricky.
I know.
So here, it's hard to see because the horse is so far away. It looks like here the outside front might be a little faster than the inside hind. Here it looks good again. So here it looks uphill, and
it's further in the face.
Yeah, it's further in the face, exactly. And here, let's see, it's hard to get just the right moment. Here it looks good again. And you see how it's very hard to even find that spot when you freeze frame, where you can see the beginning of the second beat. Here it's already the beginning of the third. That's the middle of the second beat, see? Here it's the... let's...
Can this be dragged at all?
Yeah, I'm trying to drag this back a little bit. Yeah, maybe that's a better way to do it. It's hardly detectable, right? It looks like there's a little light under the inside hind, and the outside front looks like it's already on the ground. But if you look at it in real time, you wouldn't really see it. Let's see how to continue. If I drag this a tad further, so that's middle of the second beat, and the inside front touches down, and of course every horse looks downhill in that third beat, right? And the head goes down, hind legs come up, so the pelvis lifts a little bit, and that never looks especially attractive, regardless.
And there
are
things you can
riding.
do with that, so that that improves too. But that's maybe a topic for a different.
Yeah, here it looks fairly synchronized. So the main diagonal is still in the air.
Both of them.
Both. And
both of them. Both of their legs. Yeah.
Yeah. That I can't even tell if the outside front's already on the ground.
It's not. I don't think it is.
I think it's still synchronized. So, in other words, it looks like it doesn't even happen every single stride. It happens here and there, you know. And so that might have to do with the, maybe greater flexibility of
lateral balance, longitudinal balance.
Exactly.
The aid that you gave the moment before. So many things can impact this.
So let's just go plate. But the stirrups are a little bit longer here, and that gives the seat bigger flexibility, and I think that really plays a role.
The seat has more power when the leg gives it more power.
Exactly.
By being more stretched, right?
Exactly.
So.
Yeah, you can. There is a certain power in length, as long as the stirrups are not excessively long. If they're excessively long, then it becomes unstable again, and the hips become tight again. But there's this range. Too short stirrups are not good. Too long stirrups are not good either.
Yeah.
And when you have short stirrups, you kind of need a jumping saddle that allows your thigh and knee to be in the right place and allows the pelvis to be in the right place in the saddle. Otherwise, the bulky knee rolls of the dressage saddle, they push your pelvis back in the saddle, and then that can interfere with the back movement, and it can interfere with the balance of the horse.
The ability to give your aids and your half halts in a way that will really have a good effect on the horse.
So I suspect that has a lot to do with it.
So you could work on stretching the leg more while you're riding within the ride. So it's one thing to stretch it while you're at the halt, take the legs off and rotate them inward and then bring them back on. So you're trying to, the reason you take the leg off is because it's hard to, when the leg is already on, to just turn it inward. So what you want to do is take the leg off, take the thighs off and rotate the legs inward. And you can even grab your thigh a little bit and grab it and try to help position it. You're trying to get the femur to rotate inward a little bit more. And this will enable you to get deeper down into the saddle with your legs. And it's a work in progress. It takes a while to sculpt the leg that we have from a pedestrian's leg, right, to a really nice stretched dressage leg. Right. It takes some while.
Yeah,
It takes a while.
In addition, you could also always work on lifting the forehand of the horse higher in the canter, so you could step into the outside stirrup when the withers come up, and you can use the outside rein, for example, at the same time. That lifts the forehand a little higher. Next canter stride, when your seat gets pulled forward in the second beat, you could step into either both stirrups to synchronize that diagonal, or you could step into the inside hind alone to shift the weight into the inside hind, and that could ground the inside hind a tad sooner. Yeah. And in the third stride, outside hind leg, outside stirrup. It's like outside, both, outside. So you shift the weight completely to the hind end, and you raise the withers, lower the inside hip, raise the withers is basically another way of saying it, right? And then that would also contribute to synchronizing that main diagonal.
I would also experiment with giving more obvious releases of the rein.
That's true.
What can cause the neck to become short, like we saw in the one picture, wasn't in the other one, but in the one picture, and the shoulder to make contact with the ground sooner than you like, is when the rein gets a little stuck, right? It happens to all riders at some point. So, but there's a remedy for that. So give your half halt and make sure every half halt has a clear release, that your half halt doesn't get stuck with a hanging or pulling on the rein. So you give your half halt and you release. You give your half halt and release. If you feel like you can't release, it's always a sign that your half halt didn't go through. So there are things that we can do to improve that, but then you know where to look. Then you know what to work on, okay? And that can make a big impact on your riding. It can make a big impact on the balance of the horse, on the way the horse carries himself. And it can make a big impact on what you're able to achieve.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
I think this is...
I think that's it. Thanks for your question, Tiana.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, then maybe we'll see you all in a different video.
Yeah.